Welcome to the Business English Podcast. My name is Tanya Suarez, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about how being a non-native speaker is actually a leadership superpower. Perfect English is not the goal. At this level in your career, confident communication is what will actually help you develop your executive presence and increase your influence and impact. To help me make this point, I've invited a special guest who is a director of engineering. Being from Italy and with experience growing his career in tech in the US at companies like Upwork, Pinterest, Spotify, Snap, PayPal, I knew he'd be a great resource with really helpful insights for you. Speaking of insights, remember to go to tanyasuarez.com and download your free guide to American business expressions. This will boost your business English communication and help you speak more naturally and confidently. And now let's meet our special guest. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Tanya. I'm Sebastiano. I'm right now a director of engineering at Upwork, which for people that don't know, it's a marketplace that connects freelancers and clients. And I'm from Italy, as you can tell from my accent, maybe. And I live in Los Angeles.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so working at high-level companies such as Upwork and Pinterest, and you have such amazing experience. What were some communication challenges that you faced in your career, especially at the beginning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for people that are non-native speakers, one of the challenges is the fear not being understood, or sometimes not understanding people, but I guess mostly not sure how people perceive you. And I think that's where at the beginning of my career, definitely I had the feeling, that fear about, people that they were judgmental about the way I was speaking.
Now, that fear, I'm curious, did that ever actually happen? Like, did anybody ever say anything that was judgy, or did you perceive it?
I think definitely people have asked me, can you repeat? Or what did you say? What did you mean? But I think for non-native speakers, all those questions, they get magnified, and they get in your head, and you think like, oh, maybe I'm not speaking properly. Maybe I should change the way I speak.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the trigger of it could just be that you were mumbling. It wasn't really the English. Okay. And actually, I'm really curious. I don't think we've ever even talked about your English journey. Were you already proficient in English when you started your career in tech, or was it something that you started as an adult?
Well, I studied English in high school, but then I didn't practice for probably 5-6 years. And then when I moved to Australia, that's where basically I found out that I didn't know English really, because even though when you learn English at school, it's completely different from go to a country, especially Australia, with a specific accent. So really, like, I learned on the job. I learned by osmosis with other people and watching.
Was that stressful?
Yeah, for sure it was stressful, because often I couldn't follow. I mean, both the communication of being understood, but also like following what people were saying. So like sometimes you were left out, or like you were trying to catch up on what people were saying. And like maybe people were already at the next sentence and you were still thinking about the previous one. Or like how to interject and say things that they make sense, and like and also like you want to keep your personality in, and you try to be funny, but like it's also, there are lots of complexities.
And actually, that's something I really admire about you, because you have such a good sense of humor and you're pretty sarcastic. And I find that sarcasm is one of the hardest types of humor to translate, because even being bilingual in Spanish, I'm sarcastic in English, but I have a harder time expressing that sense of humor in Spanish. And you do it so well. And so I was actually wondering, when did you feel, or was there a moment or kind of a time in your life when you felt like, oh, I'm funny in English, I can be that version of myself?
No, thanks for that. I think maybe in the last couple of years I was in Australia, and maybe I was kind of like leading group of engineers. Just the fact that like I was making some jokes and people were laughing about it, I think was, to me, it was like, oh, okay, I'm definitely improving. I'm better than 5 years ago, where I couldn't follow completely what people were saying, or people had to ask me to repeat continuously.
That's got to be such a good feeling when you finally feel like, oh, people are laughing. They get me.
Yeah,
Like they're
yeah,
laughing with
exactly.
me, not at me.
Exactly. Now,
Because
I don't know
that's
if they were
different.
laughing for my accent or they were laughing about the joke. I have to find out, but
But you know what? That's also another thing where when you have those moments, I find that you can choose because there's no way to verify that. So you can choose the self conscious route of like, oh, they're laughing at me, like I'm not being funny. Or you can choose, like, maybe I am being funny and just grow your confidence in that
hmm
area, which I find you tend to be really good at. You tend to choose a path to build on. And I
hmm
think that's really hard, but really interesting.
No, thanks.
Another thing I was curious about is what do you do, especially for you because you're really good at public speaking?
hmm
And how was that journey for you? Like when you started getting into public speaking, did
hmm
you say no to those opportunities or were you the one actively pursuing those?
No, I was actively pursuing them actually, because I don't know, maybe it's I'm egocentric, I don't know, but definitely if I think back in 2011, my first talk, which
Mhm.
maybe it's even online, hopefully not, but uh,
We'll go
definitely
look
like
for it after.
I mean, I would say my level of English wasn't perfect. Not that now it's perfect, but definitely, there were lots of things to polish, even in the way I was presenting. But I think that the silver line is, you have to start somewhere, and,
Mhm.
and then you can improve on from that. I think if you keep waiting for being perfect, you will never start.
No, because at every level, there's always someone better than you, or you can think of
Right.
how many ways you can be better. So yeah, to just go for it. And what made you mentioned ego, but I feel like take the motivation however it presents itself, whether it's ego or competitive nature or whatever that is. So for you, how are you able to, because to me it's like very different. There's the ego that holds you back, that
Mhm.
perfectionism, and then there's the ego that makes you want to challenge yourself. So how do you continuously challenge yourself because you kept going back. You've done some really awesome public speaking at bigger conferences since then. So
Yeah.
what's your inspiration for yourself?
No, good question. I think overall it's mostly about the passion of teaching, the passion of a topic that you really like. Also, I mean, definitely, the ego is one thing, but like jokes aside, it's also like, when you speak in public events, I think you really need to be passionate about explaining concepts to people, and and really wanted to go deep on a topic. I think that, to me, that's a key part when I prepare a talk. Like for me, it's also an opportunity to learn more and just clarify my thoughts.
I like it. And what's your process with the excitement or the nervousness? Like, no matter how seasoned a public speaker, everyone feels some adrenaline, whether it's negative or positive. How do you help yourself get in the zone before you go on stage?
Yeah, that's all the time. You're definitely not scared, but nervous about the talk. Drinking water, but not too much water. Uh, like slow down with caffeine. Like maybe a coffee is good to spike your attention, but not too much.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you'll shake. I've made this mistake where I drank too much caffeine and I was literally shaking on
Oh,
stage, and
no.
also your voice gets disrupted by that. I would say also like power moves. Maybe you don't have to do in public, but like
Mhm.
before the talk, I think it's good to do power moves to get more confident. I think other things is like wearing your favorite or like an outfit that you feel confident. I think it's
Mhm.
also key. I personally don't eat before a talk, just because
Like at
um,
all?
no, because unless
Interesting.
unless it's in the afternoon at 4 p.m., then
Mhm.
I'll be starving. But if it's anytime before, I would say 12 or
Mhm.
1 p.m., yeah, I usually don't eat because it just slows me down. I'm already gonna be very excited and
Mhm.
nervous. Yeah, those are like the main things I do before a talk.
What about when you're in the talk? So that's before.
Mhm.
When you're in it and you realize oh crap, like I'm speaking too fast, or you kind of see, when you can like see that you're losing the audience, like how would you advise other people to draw their audience in again, or to just kind of refill their confidence halfway through a speech?
Yeah, that's also something happens often. I would say pause, drink a glass of water,
Mm-hmm.
reset a bit, get some energy that maybe you lost through the talk, because I don't know, if you speak for half an hour, it
Oh.
might happen that the first 10 minutes you have a certain energy, and then maybe you get slightly tired. So maybe
Yeah.
drink a glass of water, reset. And then I try to use some humor sometimes if I can. I mean, if I have the inspiration, or if otherwise, like, just make sure that your tone of voice stays high, and like, and trying also in some cases to engage the audience, asking questions. So you have to be ready sometimes to go off script or what you prepared on, if you see that your audience is losing attention.
I love that. So being flexible,
Hmm.
being open to kind of changing it up when you need to. Now, what about your own advice to yourself? So later on, we'll talk about advice you have for others in terms of your English development. Because I love that you said you learned English in high school, then kind of forgot about it, and then threw yourself in to this complete English speaking environment. What advice would you give yourself at the beginning of your English journey? Would you do something different? Would you,
Yeah, I
I don't
would
know.
definitely be uh, mm, less worried about. I would do actually two advices. First, don't be too worried of sounding like a native speaker,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe getting being understood as your main priority. And then second, sound like a native speaker, because I think you might be, because I think the main priority when you learn a language is just to be understood, not to sound like a native. And then
Mm-hmm.
second, I think just not be worried about speaking up. I mean, looking back now, I interact with so many non-native speakers,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like billions of people that don't speak English natively, and they do speak English. So you're not alone. So don't be afraid in speaking English, even if you're not native.
Okay, I love that you said that because the speaking up part, especially in meetings, I find that if you can just get yourself to speak up early on in the meeting, you kind of break through. Is there a tip that you would have for other people of something easy they can do to speak up in the meeting, or something that you find that you do that helps you just loosen up so you can participate?
Yeah, a couple of things are at the beginning of meetings in a work environment, there are like some chit chat usually happens. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe like interjecting in those chit chat helps, because those are like usually casual discussions on what you did over the weekend, what you did yesterday, which movie you watched, the movies, that kind of stuff, which are like pretty, easy. And then second, often, like, when you are in a virtual meeting nowadays, you have functionality like raise hands. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those are very helpful in, I guess,
Hmm.
having you prepare what to say in some ways, but also like not be worried about interjecting when people are speaking, because often, like, that's the other problem, is that when you have native speakers speaking among each other, like, they're very fast in like going back and forth. And as
Mm-hmm.
a non-native speaker, like interjecting those, half a second, it sometimes can be challenging. So if you raise your hand, it's just easier.
Oh, I like that. So using the virtual tools to kind of
Mhm.
ease
If
into it.
if you're in a virtual setting.
And with the small talk, I find that even native speakers, typically people will say they hate it, but I find it's like you said, it's such an easy way. Everybody talks about the same stuff: the weather, where
Right.
you are, what you did on the
Right.
weekend, what movie you watched. So just prep it
Exactly.
before.
Exactly. You can even prep. Yeah. True.
Yeah. And just like unlock the voice. And I find even participating can be really challenging, but as a non native speaker, asking questions is a
Mm,
nice way to kind of step
true.
into that confidence so you don't feel the
Yeah,
pressure of answering, but you seem really engaged.
true.
Well, moving on to remote communication, which
Uh-huh.
ties into the virtual communication. So you work in tech, it's multilingual, multinational, it's just an amazingly diverse, whether it's time zones or countries, everything. So when it comes to communicating in such a big way, what are some strategies that you use to ensure that your team stay aligned?
Especially nowadays, since COVID, lots of people are remote. And actually, my current job at Upwork, I have in my organization people from probably over 15 countries: Europe, Asia, South America, North America. So that becomes really relevant. Strategies I use is really using both written and oral communication as
Mhm.
channel for communicating. And what I mean for that is that if you have a meeting, sharing an agenda before, and maybe often you share a doc where
Love
people
it.
get questions. So
Mhm.
you can have the also like people that they are more shy, also they are not great at oral communication to write down their questions. That helps. I think the second part is asynchronous versus synchronous communication. So I would say that use both the channels, and they are both important, but especially for people that are non-native speakers or they're still beginners, I think it's
Mhm.
important to use asynchronous communication because they might think over what you write. And sometimes, even after you have asynchronous communication with them, just reiterate on what you said or making sure that they understood the point because you might assume sometimes that they completely understood what you said or like and you have to
Mhm.
reiterate on the message. Yeah, and then I think the third thing is during meetings making sure sometimes call out some people that they're silent, to
Oh,
make sure that they want to speak out. Not in an invasive way, but like
okay.
just as a checkpoint to make sure that there is anything that they want to add to the conversation.
I
This
love
is
that.
like I don't do that all the time, but if it's a meeting that I want to make sure that everyone gets heard.
Okay, I love that because I feel like all of those inclusive techniques that you mentioned, they're so good for language sensitivities, especially I love that because in a multicultural industry like technology, to give people the chance. Do you find that that helps your team contribute more? Because I find that the quiet
Mm,
people or the shy people, they have great ideas, but where an extrovert will thrive and participate, they might hold back. So do you find that this helps with the
yes, totally.
creativity?
Yeah, and that connects to the DNI, diversity and inclusion topics. I think the more
Mhm.
you have diverse voices, the better outcome you have. And I think as a leader, you need to make sure that you include those diverse voices. So I think that's where the two ideas of DNI are complementary. And the more diverse ideas you have, I think the more it's not just me saying it, but like there are lots of
Mhm.
studies saying that you get to better solutions, better
Mhm.
products for your customers. I work in tech and like already thinking about the fact that like a consumer product is used by millions of people, and there are like so many different people. And
Yeah.
if you're able to replicate in your company in the set of employees that you have, the set of diversity that use your app or your product, it creates like a similar effect in understanding how the product gets used and how you can improve the product.
Oh, I love that. Such great sound bites. Okay. That was so good. But seriously,
So,
I
so
I
deep.
think it is deep because I feel like there is some I don't want to say especially in tech, but I feel like when it comes to diversity and inclusion,
Mhm.
there's like the people who are really open to it and the people who feel like, ugh, this is another politically correct initiative. But I find that tapping into that really magnifies the talents that you have.
Yeah, and I feel like for us in tech is like something that it's a norm. It's kind of like established for years. So like sometimes I
Hmm.
don't think about it. Like I had any type of diversity in my teams, but it's kind of you don't even think about it. Versus I think in other disciplines, in other professions, people like just think a bit more about the diversity and like versus I think in tech is just, yeah, it comes maybe with the territory of engineering.
In line with having teams all over the place, what's your approach to leading and motivating the team, especially in
Mm.
this remote work setting?
It's a good question because I noticed that people get motivated differently in different parts of the world and different culture. But I think some people I noticed get more motivated by solving technical challenges.
Well, because I was thinking about you were talking about one of the presentations we worked on was about
Mm.
OKRs. And I
Yeah.
remember you talking about incentivizing the team and keeping them aligned through different ways, whether it's gamifying or.
So yeah, I think there are different ways I notice across the world that people get motivated. Aside from the table stake monetary rewards, I think people, they might get more motivated through games and gamification to be more
Mhm.
social and interact more with people. Other people, they're more, they just want to solve technical issues and they prefer working in their silos. Other people are very mission driven, and I feel like you need to really reiterate on the mission of the company, and they get excited by that. Other people, they get more interest in the business, and they really thrive like understanding where the company is going for. Other get more excited about the product itself and less on the technology side of things. So I think there is a different set of ways that people get motivated. Now, there might be some correlation between the culture and where they're located and why they get motivated. But yeah, definitely, I notice like a variety of motivational patterns.
Okay, so that's interesting because of where you are right now in your career, because I could see that with a small team, the feasibility of tailoring to those different kind of personalities. But now that you're managing bigger teams, that you're in bigger
Mhm.
companies, how do you scale that kind of mindfulness that you have? Do you focus on the differentiation on your one-on-ones, or
Mhm.
how do you really, as a
Yeah,
manager, like how do you implement this?
yeah, I think multiple ways. First of all, you need to have your direct reports, your managers. You need to be aligned with them and make sure that you march in the same directions. So I think the culture that you set with them is probably the similar culture that they set
Mm.
with their teams. Then second, definitely meeting people often. So one-on-one, of course, we are direct, one-on-ones with your skip level, all hands. So like meetings with the overall group where you make sure that you clarify where you're going and motivate people accordingly. I think that those are like very important opportunities. I think just being present in tech, we use a lot Slack or like similar tools like for
Mhm.
real-time communication. Just I feel like being present in channels, in those being present in those channels, I think is very critical. And just I think people get, at least for the feedback I get, people get energized and motivated by seeing leader present in those channels and interact.
So being more involved. Well, when it comes to that kind of communication, I guess it does vary depending on the company culture, but do you find in order to translate tone, because being
Mm,
present, especially with someone, like I never recommend using sarcasm in writing because it's
yes.
so hard to.
Mhm. Yep, yep,
So
yep, yep.
modifying your humor, do you recommend using emojis and stuff like that just to make sure the tone is also there?
Yep, 100%. Emojis is like, I feel like in our Slack channels, they're used a lot for replies, for even for when you send a message. But I already feel like when you send a message and like people put thumbs up, you can feel that, okay, people acknowledge you, they're with you,
Mhm.
or they put a smile, they put 100, they put a 100 icon. Like you feel like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, people are very supportive. And I think all
Okay.
those things are like we use them a lot. I agree with you. No sarcasm or even no things that can be controversial. I think it's better to have a
Yes.
communication which is like short sentences, and then you can be more colorful during video calls. Something that I haven't used personally that I at some point I was interested in using was like recording videos and sharing on those asynchronous channels.
Mhm.
I feel like not many people has used it, and maybe a couple have used it, but I don't feel like they get the same response as like messages. Maybe
I
because they're longer to be watched, and people like they just want to be like reading things very fast.
I agree. Voice messages and video messages, I get the intention behind it, but because of the time component, I feel like it
Right.
feels like another meeting, like another time suck. Whereas just a short, and I love that you said to keep it concise. So if you tend to be someone who or come from a culture that over explains,
Mhm.
say it
Oh
in one or
yes.
two sentences for that kind of medium. And it's so much more helpful.
Yes, yes.
Also, something
Mhm.
I always recommend, and I think you might agree, never text, email, or Slack anything that you wouldn't want printed and shown to everyone in the company.
Totally. Exactly right. Because it often happens that I get screenshot of other people's messages from anyone at the company that, you might have one report that says something controversial, and you get someone else screenshotting and sending to you, and they might do the same for what you say. So always be very yeah, as you said, concise and
If you wouldn't want the CEO to read it, do
exactly.
not type it.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent for nonverbal communication. Okay, so for your career growth, something
Mhm.
that I think is really interesting is that you took your career growth and you turned it into mentoring. And something
Mm.
that you do outside of work, which I think is
Yeah.
fascinating, is your mentoring and your consulting. So, what inspired you to help other engineering leaders develop their leadership and management skills?
Yeah, I think it all comes with helping other people and supporting other people, which is at the core of management. I feel like when you get into management, the reason why I think you do this job is to empower other people, supporting other people. So I think mentoring is another facet of that, where you might have people that they don't report to you, but they might be people that they're growing their career, or their peers. They basically need someone that they want to hear experiences from someone that has been there or has seen certain things. It's important to have an open mindset where you really want to help people, share your knowledge, but also it's an opportunity for you to learn as well from problems that people have, and sometimes also to clarify in your mind best strategies for certain problems that maybe you've seen it in the past here and then, but you haven't collected your thoughts clearly.
Oh, interesting. And what about, because I find that your experience as a non native speaker and having gone through what you've been through gives you a really good edge and a really good sense of empathy. Do you find
Mhm.
that that
Mm.
helps you help others even better?
True. Yeah, totally. I think empathy is key to make sure that, I think you're a good leader, you're a good manager, you enjoy like mentoring. You really want to be compassionate and yeah, empathetic about what people are going through, the problems that they have. And I think if you've been there, it's just easier to to understand where people are. And that's why I think it helps having lots of experiences in tech to be able to, or to be passionate about mentoring, really.
Yeah, I feel like being a non native speaker is actually more of a superpower because you've had to think differently
Mm,
and challenge the way you like you're constantly revising the way you communicate to be more effective.
right.
And so I
True.
think it creates a sharper sense of connection.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very, very true. Because sometimes I talk to some engineering leader that is struggling a bit with English. I definitely I'm very empathetic because I've been there, and I,
Mm-hmm.
I know what the issues that they're going through, and like sometimes I see that they're worried about what they say, they're worried about being understood, and so I definitely do the extra effort in helping them and making them feel comfortable.
Oh, that makes me so happy. Because that's such a big deal in that I find that if you don't have that sensitivity, when you hear someone have that hesitation, you might doubt their expertise.
Right.
But
Exactly.
from this perspective of that they know. It's just they are struggling with letting themselves express it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. Because
Huh.
that's also one of the, I think, issues that sometimes you get, that people might think, oh, that person doesn't it's hesitating she's hesitating because they don't know what you're talking about, which I think is also a natural inflection. Like it's a natural thing that comes when you're a native speaker. I mean, I'm a native speaker in my language. I might have the same bias for Italian.
Interesting. So, how do you recommend for other people who have that tendency of hesitating and they're second guessing themselves? Is there anything that you've done that's worked for you or that you would recommend for them to just say it, say something,
Yeah,
get it out there?
I would say power through, be confident regardless of what's in your head. Maybe talk with other non-native speakers at the company. Sometimes it's good
Oh,
to like just talk about those challenges with other non-native speakers, or even just being open with whoever you're communicating with. Like say, hey, I think it's a good technique to, even when you are in a forum one-on-one with someone, or even in larger meeting, to say, oh, by the way, if anyone doesn't understand my accent, feel free to ask as a humor, but like not like in a soft way. I
because
think
it
it,
takes the pressure off. If you
yeah,
just say it, everyone's aware of it. And I feel like even though it's an obvious thing, I know what
exactly.
you like. It's empowering to just take ownership of it and be like, well, English is my third language. So then you
Yeah,
kind of like
exactly.
promote yourself.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to ask me if I know my accent is difficult to understand. Phrases like that, I think they're usually well perceived, and they make you also more confident.
I will say the one thing I recommend for that particular technique is to say those moments of humor slowly and with a smile.
Mm,
Because if you're
right,
nervous and you mumble it and you look serious, I don't think the audience will feel comfortable kind of
right,
laughing
true.
with you. So you
That's
want to make
true.
sure you bring them in and you give permission for that kind of, because everyone's trying to be respectful. So if it is a humor tactic,
Very true.
slow down.
Very true. And it has to be like said, as a humor thing. If you're not saying it with a smile, definitely it can be perceived in the other direction for sure.
Exactly. It can build confidence if said slowly and clearly, or it can make you look completely
Mm,
shy and not the kind of person the company wants to step in front of an audience.
true. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great that you have all that experience that you're sharing with others. And I know you mentor startups as well as individual engineering leaders. What about with the coaching that you've received? How do you feel that since you have both the experience of coaching and being coached,
Yeah.
how has that helped you elevate your communication?
Oh, absolutely. It's been key in my development in communicating better overall. I think a few things are confidence. I think it definitely helps you with making sure that you really own your accent and you really embrace sometimes the fact that you're not going to speak like a native speaker, but you're still well understood. And the things that you're saying, they're very valuable. I think that's a very important thing. I think the second is help on pronunciation of some words that you
Mm.
often say, because in a language there are millions of words, but like the words that you say in a word setting, they're often similar, or there are lots of words that you repeat. And I think it's very key that you say those words very well. It just changes sometimes the perception of what you say. And I think definitely coaching helped me with that. And I think it's also like good to have someone to bounce off ideas, and someone that can, as a third party, advise you on any career direction you want to take, or
Mm.
any presentation that you might have, any interview that you might have. And having someone that very knowledgeable and can give you those insights, I think is incredible.
Because I find that having received coaching myself as well, the things that you so clearly see for others,
Hmm.
sometimes you're like not as clear for yourself or you're still holding back. And just to have, like you said, that third party, that other voice of just kind of shake you into the version of yourself that's confident and is there
Yeah.
can be so helpful.
Yep. And also coach like probably talks with lots of people like
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like you get experience from so many people, so it's beneficial for you to basically get a condensed version of what other people say, and you just get a like those advice that on your own you wouldn't be able to get.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Okay, so last but not least, okay, so
Yep.
in your experience, what are the most important communication skills for an engineering leader in tech?
Okay, I think there are a few key skills. Clear communicator in the sense of being able to explain well concepts. upwards and downwards. I think that's key, because you need to be able to represent your group to your managers, but also you need to communicate really well downwards with with your directs, with your skip level, with your team. And then also, like, you need to be able to communicate with other stakeholders and peers very well.
Mhm.
I think
But
that's
to
number
pause you
one.
there, how do you recommend practicing that?
I definitely write down, at least, it's not you have to memorize what you say, but like I think
Mhm.
having bullet points at the minimum of what you're gonna say, I think is key. If you have a presentation, I think it's also good to have a script that maybe you
Mhm.
just read a couple of times. And you probably, when you present, you won't say exactly what you say in the script, but it just super, super helpful for you to like have the mental model of the different steps of the things that you need to say. If it is a casual conversation, because when we speak as a leaders, it's not always a presentation. You have also speak like in one-on-one settings, or
Over coffee in the
yeah,
office.
exactly. So I think definitely being relaxed, being transparent on what you're saying, like I think that definitely really helps in being natural. When you talk one-on-one, it's good sometimes to prepare, look at your calendar, and look at the meetings that you have, and thinking about, okay, this person, roughly those are the topics we're going to talk about. Maybe you can write down bullet points again. So that's some preparation I do, like usually the day before, or even at the beginning of the week. I know like all the meetings they have, so like I prepare roughly in my head what are the things I need to say, or we need to talk about. I think just makes you a bit more direct, and be more comfortable, confident about the topics that you're going to discuss.
Yes, actually, I'm so glad you said direct, because I find that, to piggyback off of that, when you have such different cultures, a lot of cultures communicate differently than Americans do. And so
Mhm.
I find, especially Latin America, Italians, like other European countries, or but really just a lot of others, will take a journey before getting to the point.
Mhm.
And so I love that preparation tip of the bullet points, because I always recommend, if you only have people's attention for one sentence, that first sentence has to be the bottom line,
Mhm.
then the details and descriptions, and
Yep.
then end with the bottom line again,
I 100% agreed. Yes.
which is such a hard habit when you're not in the habit of doing it. So I
Mhm.
love, love, love bullet points. Well, thank you for those wonderful tips. And last but not least, what is one piece of advice you'd give to non-native English speakers aspiring to leadership roles in tech?
I would say keep learning your craft, keep learning, be passionate, be curious about whatever you're doing. In terms of like speaking, practice and listen how other people speak. Sometimes even how
Yep.
people speak, and the cadence that people use. I often notice that cadence is actually more important than a perfect pronunciation.
And grammar.
Um,
Intonation and cadence is so much more important than grammar.
yes. And
100%.
back to the point I was making before, about when I studied English at school in Italy, like there was lots of emphasis on grammar. So
Mm-hmm.
like actually my grammar, I noticed in some cases, was even better than native speaker when I moved to Australia. But then like my English was, of course, 1,000 words, because it doesn't really matter if you know that, there are like five tenses. And I think the intonation and the cadence is just more important, because people need to follow you. And if you make a grammar mistake, I make grammar mistakes in Italian. Like, who cares? Like,
It's not
so yeah,
it's not going to make or break you.
yeah, exactly. As long as if you keep making grammar mistakes, then people, like, they might get a different perception. But
I find that confidence and confident intonation will always, I find it to be a mistake eraser. Like you said, of course, like huge mistakes made over and over again. Yeah, that might reflect poorly. But in general, American communication, we tend to speak in fragments. Like you said, we
Mhm.
tend to just interject. So don't be afraid of sometimes just saying a few words
Mhm.
and being included in the moment. So that, like you said before, where the conversation passes you by and you're still trying to think about what you wanted to say about the first point, to just jump
Exactly.
in.
Exactly. Don't be a perfectionist. and wanted to know exactly each words, especially at the beginning. Like I
Yes.
remember, oh, I want to know all the different words that people said, but like, I mean,
It's
even now,
exhausting.
yeah, even now it happens sometimes, like especially if people talk in slang or something, like I don't get all the words, but it doesn't matter. The main thing is like you understand the overall context.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your
Thank
valuable
you.
insights. Make sure you check out the video notes to follow Sebastiano on LinkedIn and get more engineering leadership tips.
Thanks to you, Tanya. That was fun.